Here with us to discuss is Mayor Glenn Ignacio, a retired U.S. Air Force Special Operations Commander and military analyst, and Jonathan Wachtel, a global affairs analyst. Merry Christmas to you both. Thank you so much for being here. Jonathan, let's start with President Putin's message to President Trump. Does that indicate anything about where things stand in these peace deal negotiations, or should we take this Christmas message with a grain of salt?
Well, Jessica, I've had dealings with the former Soviet Union going back to the mid-'80s, actually, when I was an exchange student in Leningrad. And to have a message going to the President of the United States like this is really a rare type of message. So clearly there's some sort of warm feelings about where things stand with the President of the United States at the moment.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, this never happened with Biden, so to speak. Glenn, while these potential peace discussions have been happening, Ukraine has been fatally bombing Moscow. So could Ukraine be at a potential turning point in this war?
From a military standpoint, I really don't think so, because at the stand, you see those particular strikes against that general, or you see certain strikes against pipelines and so forth into Russia. Okay, they're great tactically, but as far as moving the military or the Russian military out of Ukraine, there's really not gains on that. Right now, Russia is still, unfortunately, making some progress there. So unfortunately, I don't see Ukraine militarily pushing Russia completely out of the country. Their weakness is troops, so even if they had a lot of weapons, that would be tough. However, as we get into these negotiations, I know that they're getting another $100+ billion from the European Union. And again, the difficult sensitivities will be the concession of land and so forth. So that's where we stand so far on the combat side, where that's the sort of the split between Ukraine and Russia.
Okay, and Glenn, Zelensky has said that he's open to a demilitarized zone as part of the peace plan. Probably the most famous DMZ is between North and South Korea. Can you explain how this kind of area would work in that region?
Yeah, it's really concerning because the area would be split sort of where the Russian lines are right now and where Ukraine is. It's very much into that battle area. The trust issue is they would both have to sort of pull out of that area to make it a DMZ, and neither one trusts each other to do that. The other thing is who would manage that? Now, that would be right now, as you see in North Korea and South Korea, it's mined, it's heavily defended militarily. What this is supposed to be is sort of like a area that would be independent, that people could do business in. So it's like a tax-free area is what we propose. I can't think of the term right now. But anyways, it'd be hard to be managed militarily, and it'd be hard to be able to establish that. The other thing is as we move through this, one of the things that Zelensky is very smart with is anything from the security apparatus that will back up Ukraine or anything else, is that he doesn't just want it for President Trump. He wants Congress, U.S. Congress, to also back it up. The reason is that when President Trump moves on, that these things will still maintain. And if that's a U.S. involvement for maintaining that security in the DMZ or European Union, it would be solid for the future, not just right now as we get to a ceasefire, hopefully someday.
Jonathan, hypothetically, what would, if this ever were to come about, the benefits and drawbacks be of a DMZ in that region?
First of all, as the general laid out, a DMZ type of situation like you have between the Koreas is just not going to be a starter here, because Vladimir Putin has made it abundantly clear he's not going to let foreign boots on the ground in this conflict. Although, mind you, he does have, speaking of Korea, North Koreans fighting on his side, ironically. But the basic situation here, and I think the general will probably concur, is we may be heading to what's called a frozen conflict, in which there's not going to be the end of the war necessarily. It may be a scenario like you have between North and South Korea. That war never ended. We're technically still at war with China, actually. So we could end up in that type of scenario because at the moment, still, despite President Zelensky's, effort to try to find some sort of way to appease Putin through this demilitarized zone, it's not something that Vladimir Putin is biting at with enthusiasm. He does feel that he has the upper hand, and he'll continue to press as long as he feels that nothing's stopping. Another thing that happened that's been a setback for the West, certainly, is that the Europeans were looking at ways to help shore up Ukraine financially to be able to sustain itself over the next couple of years. And instead of working out a way in which to move assets of Russia to pay for this for the Ukrainians that were being primarily held by Belgium, the Europeans kind of capitulated and worked out a zero interest loan to the Ukrainians to be able to shore up their finances for the next couple of years. As far as Vladimir Putin is concerned, he looks at that and he sees that there's no unity within Europe itself, which is supposed to be a united front against his aspirations on the continent.
Jonathan, in Zelensky's post, he said Witkoff and Kushner also spoke with a Russian advisor today. Do you think that an end to this nearly 4-year-long war is in sight?
I do think that there's such fatigue on both sides. And while Vladimir Putin put up a really bravado press conference, 4.5-hour long press conference a few days ago, in which he outlined in an orchestrated fashion to his general public that everything's going well with the war and he's going to get all that the Russians seek to achieve in this conflict. I do feel that that's what he wants. I certainly think he's going to get away with a lot, having started this war, and he will end up, with huge swaths of Ukrainian territory. And Jessica, we're not talking about little slivers of land. We're talking about huge land masses. The Ukraine is a massive country. It's small in Russia certainly, but it's bigger than France. And these are big chunks of that country that are right now looking like they'll remain in the hands of the Russians for as long as whatever the agreement is worked out for.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been 4 years. Major Glenn Ignacio, Jonathan Wachtel, thank you both. Merry Christmas to you both and to your families.